I don't need your money, sir. Mia pushed the $100 bill back toward the man in the $5,000 suit, her small fingers steady despite the December wind cutting through her threadbare jacket. Snow was falling on the Chicago sidewalk at 2 a.m., settling on her bare shoulders, her worn sneakers, the red bracelet woven from shoelaces wrapped around her wrist. Jonathan Reed stared at her, this 12-year-old girl with frost on her eyelashes and fire in her eyes, and felt something he hadn't felt in decades: confusion. People didn't refuse his money. People didn't refuse anything from Jonathan Reed. But this child was looking at him like he was something dangerous, something contaminated, something she wouldn't touch, even if her life depended on it. "Please," he said, softer now. "It's freezing. At least take enough for a warm meal." The girl's eyes met his, and in them he saw something that made his blood run cold. Not fear, not desperation, recognition. "I know who you are, Mr. Reed," she said quietly. "I know what your company did, and your money has my parents' blood on it." Jonathan Reed had been rich for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be questioned. He was 52 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, the founder and CEO of Reed Pharmaceuticals, a company worth $14 billion, employing 30,000 people across 3 continents. He had been on the cover of Forbes twice, had shaken hands with 3 presidents, had donated more money to charity than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. He was, by every measure that mattered in American society, a success, a good man, a pillar of the community. He had just come from the annual Chicago Children's Hospital Gala, where he had written a check for $2 million and received a standing ovation. He was feeling generous, magnanimous, blessed. And then he saw the girl. She was sitting on a heating grate outside a closed pharmacy, her knees pulled to her chest, her breath visible in the frozen air. No coat, no gloves, no hat. Just a thin sweater that might have been purple once, before countless washes faded it to gray, and a pair of jeans with holes at the knees that weren't fashionable, just worn through. Jonathan had walked past homeless people thousands of times in his life. Usually he didn't stop. Tonight, flush with the warm glow of philanthropy, he decided to be different. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a crisp $100 bill, and approached the girl with the smile he used for photo opportunities. "Here," he said, holding out the money. "Get yourself somewhere warm." That's when everything changed. The girl looked at the money, then at him, then back at the money. Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or rage, or both. And then she pushed his hand away. Not violently, gently. The way you might push away something poisonous that you didn't want to touch any longer than necessary. "I don't need your money, sir." Jonathan blinked. In his experience, homeless people didn't refuse $100 bills. "I'm sorry?" I said, "I don't need it." "Thank you, but no." She turned away from him, pulling her knees tighter to her chest, staring at the snow falling on the empty street, dismissing him. Jonathan Reed, dismissed by a 12-year-old girl on a heating grate. He should have walked away. Any sensible person would have walked away. But Jonathan hadn't become a billionaire by accepting rejection gracefully. He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level, and studied her face for the first time. She was young, younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 11 or 12. Her skin was dark brown, her hair pulled back in braids that were starting to come undone, her eyes large and watchful and older than they should have been. Around her left wrist was a bracelet woven from red shoelaces, the kind of thing a child might make at summer camp. It was the only spot of color on her entire body. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl was silent for a long moment. Then, Mia, I'm Jonathan. I just want to help. It's below freezing tonight. You could get hypothermia out here." "I've survived colder nights." There was no self-pity in her voice, no plea for sympathy, just a statement of fact, delivered with the matter-of-factness of someone who had learned early that the world was hard and complaining didn't make it softer. Jonathan felt a strange sensation in his chest, something like admiration, mixed with something like shame. Here he was in his cashmere coat and Italian shoes, offering charity to a child who had more dignity in her refusal than he had in his entire net worth. "Why won't you take the money?" he asked. "Is it because you don't trust me? I promise I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want you to be warm tonight." Mia turned to look at him then, really look at him, and Jonathan saw her eyes travel over his face, his clothes, his posture. She was assessing him the way he assessed business rivals, looking for weaknesses, calculating odds, determining threat levels. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know who you are, Mr. Reed. I know what your company did, and your money has my parents' blood on it." The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He actually rocked backward on his heels, nearly losing his balance on the icy sidewalk. What are you talking about?" His voice came out strange, strangled, nothing like the confident baritone he used in boardrooms and press conferences. I've never read pharmaceuticals," Mia said, and now her voice was harder, edged with something that sounded like hatred, carefully controlled. "You make drugs. You're supposed to help people." She paused, and when she continued, each word was precise as a scalpel. "In 2019, your company sold a batch of contaminated medication to Southside Community Hospital. The hospital serves poor people, black people, people nobody cares about. Your company knew the drugs were bad. They sold them anyway because poor people don't sue. Poor people don't make headlines. Poor people just die quietly." Jonathan's mind was racing, trying to process what he was hearing. Contaminated medication. Southside Community Hospital. 2019. He ran a pharmaceutical company. He couldn't possibly know about every batch of every drug sold to every hospital. But something about the girl's certainty, the precision of her accusation, made his stomach clench with a fear he couldn't name. "I don't know anything about this," he said. "If what you're saying is true—" 47 people, Mia interrupted. "That's how many died. 47 people who went to the hospital because they were sick, because they needed help, because they trusted that the medicine would make them better. And instead, the medicine killed them." Her voice cracked slightly, and for a moment she was just a 12-year-old girl again, small and cold and grieving. "My mother was one of them. She went in for a routine infection. She never came home." The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on Jonathan's shoulders, melting in his hair, but he didn't notice. He was staring at Mia, at this child who had just accused his company of killing her mother, and he felt the world shifting beneath his feet. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words felt pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know." "Your name is on the building," Mia said flatly. "Your name is on every bottle. You're supposed to know." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, to defend himself, to explain that running a $14 billion company meant delegating, meant trusting others, meant not being able to personally oversee every decision. But the excuses died in his throat. Because she was right. His name was on the building. His name was on every bottle. And if 47 people had died because of something his company did, then his name was on their graves too. "What happened to your father?" Jonathan asked quietly. Mia's face went blank, the careful emptiness of someone who had learned to hide pain so deep it might destroy her if she let it surface. 3 months after Mom died, he couldn't take it anymore. He blamed himself for not being able to save her. He blamed the hospital. He blamed God. She paused. "He hanged himself in our garage. I found him when I came home from school." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Jonathan felt tears burning in his eyes, tears for this girl, for her parents, for the magnitude of suffering that had somehow been connected to his company without his knowledge. "Mia, I need you to understand something. I had no idea this happened." If what you're telling me is true, then someone in my company did something unforgivable. And I'm going to find out who. And I'm going to make them pay." Mia laughed. It was a terrible sound, bitter and ancient and far too knowing for a child her age. "Make them pay? Mr. Reed, it's been 4 years. The families tried to sue. Your lawyers buried them. The news tried to run stories. Your PR team killed them. The police tried to investigate. Your lobbyists shut it down. 47 people are dead, and not a single person has spent a single day in jail. Because that's how it works when you're rich. That's how it works when you're powerful." She stood up, and Jonathan saw for the first time how thin she was. Skin stretched over bones. The body of a child who had been hungry for a long time. "So no, Mr. Reed, I don't want your money. I don't want your charity. I don't want you to feel good about yourself because you gave $100 to a poor black girl on the street." She looked down at him. Him, the billionaire, still crouched on the sidewalk like a supplicant, and her eyes were ancient with grief. "I want you to know. I want you to carry it. I want you to understand that every dollar in your wallet, every painting in your mansion, every medal at your charity galas, all of it was bought with blood. My mother's blood, my father's blood, and 37 other people whose names you'll never know." Jonathan couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He just knelt there on the frozen sidewalk, tears streaming down his face, as Mia turned and walked away into the snow. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had done what she came to do. She had made him see. And Jonathan Reed, who hadn't cried since his own mother's funeral 20 years ago, sobbed like a child in the middle of an empty Chicago street, surrounded by falling snow and the weight of sins he hadn't known he'd committed. The next morning, Jonathan Reed did not go to his office. He did not answer the 17 calls from his assistant. He did not respond to the urgent emails flagged with red exclamation points. Instead, he sat in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, the awards, the photographs with celebrities and politicians, the framed magazine covers, and he searched. He searched for Reed Pharmaceuticals Contaminated Medication 2019. He searched for Southside Community Hospital deaths. He searched for Chicago pharmaceutical scandal cover-up. And slowly, piece by piece, he found the truth that had been hidden from him for 4 years. The story had been buried deep, but not deep enough to disappear entirely. A local Chicago newspaper had run a small article in early 2020 mentioning concerns about a batch of antibiotics distributed to community hospitals in low-income areas. The article quoted a hospital administrator who claimed the medication had caused adverse reactions in several patients. It quoted a Reed Pharmaceuticals spokesperson who called the allegations baseless and under investigation. It quoted no patients. It quoted no families. It quoted no one who had actually suffered. Jonathan found a lawsuit filing, Williams versus Reed Pharmaceuticals, that had been dismissed in 2021 for failure to establish causation. He found a police report that had been closed due to insufficient evidence. He found a health department investigation that had concluded with no actionable findings. Every avenue of accountability had been closed, sealed, locked away. And yet, buried in a Reddit thread from 2 years ago, he found a list. A list typed out by someone claiming to be a nurse at Southside Community Hospital. A list of 47 names. Jonathan read every name out loud. He didn't know why. It felt important. It felt like the least he could do. James Williams, 67, diabetic complications. Keisha Robinson, 34, post-surgical infection. Marcus Thompson, 8, pneumonia. Jonathan stopped at that one. Marcus Thompson, 8 years old. The same age as Jonathan's grandson. A child who had gone to the hospital because he couldn't breathe properly and who had never come home because the medicine that was supposed to help him had been contaminated with something that destroyed his liver instead. Jonathan went to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left in his stomach. When he could stand again, when his hands had stopped shaking enough to type, Jonathan began a different kind of search. He searched his own company's records. He used his CEO access codes to dig into files he had never bothered to look at before. Quality control reports, batch distribution records, internal communications from 2019. What he found made the vomiting seem like a reasonable response. There had been a problem with a batch of antibiotics manufactured at their Indianapolis plant in August 2019. A quality control technician had flagged the batch as potentially contaminated, recommending it be destroyed. The recommendation had been overruled by Marcus Reed, Jonathan's younger brother, the company's chief financial officer. Jonathan stared at his brother's signature on the document, the same signature he had seen 1,000 times on birthday cards and business deals and family photographs. Marcus had authorized the distribution of a contaminated batch of antibiotics because destroying it would have cost the company $12 million. $12 million. That was what 47 lives were worth to his brother, less than the cost of their parents' yacht, less than the renovation of Marcus's vacation home in the Hamptons, less than the bonus Marcus had received that same year for exceptional cost management. The documents told the rest of the story. The contaminated batch had been sent to 5 hospitals in low-income areas, places where patients didn't have lawyers on retainer, didn't have connections to journalists, didn't have the resources to fight back when something went wrong. Southside Community Hospital in Chicago, Mercy General in Detroit, Hope Medical Center in Cleveland, St. Anthony's in Memphis, Community Health in Baltimore. When patients started dying, Marcus had activated the company's crisis management protocol. Lawyers were deployed, PR firms were hired, lobbyists made phone calls. The story was contained. The lawsuits were dismissed, the investigations were closed, and Jonathan had never known. He had never asked. He had trusted his brother, his family, his company, and that trust had cost 47 people their lives. Jonathan found Mia 2 days later. It wasn't difficult. He had resources, investigators, people who could find anyone anywhere. She was living in an abandoned building on the south side, in a space she had made surprisingly livable with cardboard insulation, blankets scavenged from dumpsters, and a small camp stove she used to heat water for instant noodles. When Jonathan appeared in the doorway, she didn't seem surprised. "I knew you'd come," she said. She was sitting on a milk crate, working on her homework by the light of a battery-powered lantern. Her textbook was battered, but intact. Her handwriting was neat and precise. Even homeless, she was still going to school, still trying to build a future from the ashes of her destroyed past. "How did you know?" Jonathan asked. "Because I saw your face that night. You really didn't know. That made you different from the others." She set down her pencil and looked at him. "So, what did you find?" Jonathan told her everything. The contaminated batch, Marcus's signature, the cover-up, the lawyers and lobbyists and PR teams, the 5 hospitals, the 47 deaths, the systematic destruction of every avenue of justice. He told her about the $12 million her mother's life had been worth to his brother. He told her about the 8-year-old boy named Marcus Thompson who had died 3 beds away from her mother. He told her until his voice gave out and there was nothing left but silence and the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the abandoned building. Mia listened without interrupting. When Jonathan finished, she reached up to the red bracelet around her wrist and began to slowly unwind it. "My father made this for me," she said quietly. "The night before he died. He took the laces from his favorite running shoes, the red ones he wore when he ran the Chicago Marathon the year before Mom got sick. He braided them together and put this inside." She pulled the bracelet apart, and Jonathan saw a small USB drive fall into her palm, barely bigger than a fingernail. He was a hospital administrator at Southside Community. When patients started dying, he knew something was wrong. He started keeping records, copying documents, gathering evidence. He thought if he could prove what happened, someone would listen. Someone would care. She held the USB drive out to Jonathan. Her hand was steady. 47 patient files, autopsy reports, toxicology analyses, internal hospital communications, and 3 recordings of phone calls between your brother Marcus and the hospital's chief medical officer, where Marcus offers $2 million to make the problem go away. Jonathan took the drive with trembling fingers. Why didn't your father take this to the police? To the FBI? To the press? He tried. The police said there wasn't enough evidence for an investigation. The FBI said pharmaceutical cases were complicated and resource-intensive. The press said they couldn't run a story without corroborating sources. Mia's voice was bitter but controlled. The bitterness of someone who had long ago accepted that the system was not designed to protect people like her. And then he died. And I was alone. And nobody cared about a 12-year-old girl with a USB drive and a dead family. Jonathan looked at the drive in his hand, then at Mia. Why are you giving this to me? After everything my company did, after everything my family did, why would you trust me with this? Mia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Jonathan had ever heard it. Because you came back. Because you cried. Because when I told you the truth, you didn't make excuses. You didn't send lawyers. You didn't try to pay me off. She paused. My father used to say that the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's whether they try to fix them when they find out. You didn't make this mistake, Mr. Reed. But you can fix it. The question is whether you will. Jonathan looked at the USB drive for a long time. $12 million. That's what it would have cost to do the right thing in 2019, to destroy the contaminated batch, to protect the patients, to save 47 lives. His brother had decided those lives weren't worth $12 million. Now Jonathan had to decide what they were worth to him. His company, his reputation, his relationship with his brother, his entire life as he knew it. Everything he had built over 3 decades could come crashing down if he exposed this truth. Or he could do what Marcus had done. He could bury it. He could pay Mia off. She was a homeless 12-year-old. How hard could it be? He could make the problem disappear and go back to his charity galas and his magazine covers and his comfortable certainty that he was one of the good ones. There's something else you should know, Mia said, as if reading his thoughts. I didn't end up homeless because we were poor. After my father died, I went to live with my grandmother. My mother's mother. She raised me for 2 years. She loved me. She took care of me. Mia's voice tightened. Then your company's lawyers showed up. They offered her $500,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement, $500,000 to never talk about what happened to her daughter, to never let me talk about it either. Jonathan felt sick again. She took it? She took it. She said she had to think about my future. She said the money could pay for my college, my security, my life. She said fighting wouldn't bring my parents back. Mia's eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. I left that night. I've been on the streets for 8 months. I'd rather freeze to death than spend a single dollar of blood money. Jonathan understood then what this girl had sacrificed. She had walked away from safety, from warmth, from the only family she had left, because her conscience wouldn't let her benefit from the cover-up that had destroyed her parents. She was 12 years old, and she had more integrity than anyone Jonathan had ever met in 3 decades of business. More integrity than his brother, more integrity than himself. I have one more question, Jonathan said slowly. That night when we met, was it really a coincidence? You were sitting outside that pharmacy at 2 a.m., in the freezing cold, in the path I always take home from the Children's Hospital Gala. Were you waiting for me? Mia smiled for the first time since Jonathan had met her. It was a small smile, sad and knowing and far too old for her face. My father kept files on everyone involved in the cover-up, everyone who signed off on it, everyone who profited from it, everyone who could have stopped it and didn't. I've been studying those files for 2 years. She paused. You weren't in them, Mr. Reed. Your brother was, the lawyers were, the PR people were, but not you. You were the only person at the top who might not have known, the only person who might actually care if they found out the truth. She looked at him steadily. So yes, I was waiting for you. I've been waiting for you for a long time. The confrontation happened 3 days later, in the executive boardroom of Reed Pharmaceutical's headquarters. Jonathan had spent those 3 days preparing, reviewing the evidence on Mia's USB drive, consulting with lawyers he trusted, not the company's lawyers, not anyone connected to Marcus, and making the hardest decision of his life. Now he sat at the head of the long mahogany table, watching his brother Marcus take his usual seat to his right, watching the board members file in with their coffee cups and their tablets and their comfortable assumption that this would be another routine meeting. They had no idea that Jonathan was about to burn everything down. Before we begin the regular agenda, Jonathan said, there's a matter I need to address. He pressed a button, and the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life, displaying the first document from Mia's USB drive, the quality control report flagging the contaminated batch with Marcus's signature overruling the recommendation for destruction. Marcus's face went pale. Jonathan, what is this? Where did you get? I'm not finished. Jonathan's voice was ice. He clicked to the next document, and the next, and the next, patient files, death certificates, autopsy reports, toxicology analyses showing the presence of contaminants that shouldn't have been there. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances, not yet understanding but sensing that something terrible was unfolding. Then Jonathan played the first recording. Marcus's voice, unmistakable, negotiating with the chief medical officer of Southside Community Hospital. $2 million. That's our final offer. You make this go away, lose the paperwork, redirect the investigation, whatever you have to do, and $2 million appears in whatever account you specify. The boardroom was silent. Marcus was gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles had gone white. Jonathan, he said, his voice strained, I can explain. It's not what it sounds like. The situation was complicated. 47 people are dead, Marcus. Jonathan's voice cracked. 47 people, including an 8-year-old boy named Marcus. Did you know that? Did you know there was a child with your name who died because you decided $12 million was worth more than his life? The next 2 hours were chaos. Board members demanded explanations. Lawyers were summoned. Marcus alternated between denial, justification, and pleading. He claimed he hadn't known the full extent of the contamination. He claimed he had been assured the risks were minimal. He claimed he had been trying to protect the company, protect jobs, protect the Reed family name. Protect the family name? Jonathan stood, his chair scraping back against the floor. Our grandfather started this company to help people. He developed drugs that saved lives because he believed medicine should be about healing, not profit. And you turned his legacy into a weapon. You used it to kill the most vulnerable people in our society and then paid lawyers to make sure no one would ever know. Marcus stood too, his face contorted with rage and fear. Don't you dare lecture me about legacy. I've been running the financial side of this company for 20 years while you played the benevolent CEO, shaking hands and giving speeches and taking all the credit. Do you have any idea what it takes to keep a pharmaceutical company profitable? The margins we operate on? The pressures we face? Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Sometimes you have to decide that 47 lives are worth less than $12 million. Jonathan was shouting now, something he never did, something he had prided himself on never doing. That's not a hard choice, Marcus. That's murder. And you covered it up. You paid people off. You destroyed evidence. You let families suffer for 4 years without any justice, any closure, any acknowledgement that their loved ones were killed by our negligence. The board voted unanimously to terminate Marcus's employment and refer the matter to federal authorities. It wasn't enough. Jonathan knew it wasn't enough. But it was a start. Marcus was escorted from the building by security, screaming threats and promises of revenge, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his entire identity as a successful executive crumbling around him. Jonathan watched him go and felt nothing but exhaustion. This wasn't justice. Justice would be 47 people coming back to life. Justice would be Mia's parents walking through the door, healthy and whole. Justice would be a world where $12 million could never be worth more than human lives. All Jonathan had done was acknowledge the truth. The real work was just beginning. The press conference happened 2 weeks later. Jonathan stood before a room full of journalists, cameras, microphones, and read a statement that he had written himself, refusing input from PR teams or lawyers or anyone else who might soften the blow. In August of 2019, Reed Pharmaceuticals knowingly distributed a batch of contaminated antibiotics to 5 community hospitals serving low-income populations. This decision, made by our former Chief Financial Officer Marcus Reed, with the knowledge and complicity of several other executives, resulted in the deaths of 47 patients. For 4 years, this company used its resources to suppress this information, silence victims' families, and obstruct investigations. I did not know about these actions. That is not an excuse. As CEO, I should have known. I should have created systems to prevent this. I failed, and 47 people died because of that failure. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. I am announcing today that Reed Pharmaceuticals will establish a $200 million compensation fund for the families of all victims. We will cover all funeral expenses, medical bills, and provide substantial financial support for every family affected. We will fully cooperate with federal investigations and waive all legal privileges that might impede the pursuit of justice. And I am personally resigning as CEO, effective immediately, to ensure that the company's reform is not compromised by my own failures of oversight. The questions exploded from the press corps. Jonathan answered some and deflected others, but through it all, his eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, where a small figure stood watching. Mia had refused his offer to sit in the front row, refused to be identified as the source of the evidence, refused everything except the chance to witness this moment. She stood alone, her red bracelet visible on her wrist, her face expressionless. When Jonathan finished speaking, she nodded once, then slipped out the door. The aftermath unfolded over the following months like a slow-motion avalanche. Federal prosecutors charged Marcus Reed with 47 counts of involuntary manslaughter, plus conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The chief medical officer of Southside Community Hospital was charged as a co-conspirator. 3 lawyers from Reed Pharmaceuticals' legal team were disbarred and faced their own criminal charges. The PR firm that had managed the cover-up lost most of its clients and eventually closed. The FDA launched a comprehensive investigation into pharmaceutical quality control practices nationwide, resulting in sweeping reforms that experts estimated would save thousands of lives over the coming decades. Marcus Reed was convicted on all counts after a trial that dominated national headlines for 3 months. The prosecution's star witness was a 12-year-old girl who took the stand and, in a calm, clear voice, described finding her father's body in the garage, described the years of fighting for justice that had destroyed her family, described choosing homelessness over complicity. When the defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she had fabricated evidence, suggesting she had been coached, suggesting her age made her an unreliable witness, Mia responded with a single question. Would you like me to recite the names of all 47 victims? Because I can. I've memorized them. I say them every night before I sleep so I never forget why I'm fighting. The defense attorney had no follow-up questions. Marcus Reed was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. He would be eligible for parole in 22 years when he would be 78 years old. As he was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned to look at Jonathan, who was sitting in the gallery. The brothers' eyes met for the last time. Marcus's face was a mask of hatred and betrayal. Jonathan's face was sad, but resolute. They had grown up together, played together, built an empire together. Now one of them was going to prison, and the other was going to spend the rest of his life trying to atone for sins he hadn't committed, but hadn't prevented either. The door closed behind Marcus, and Jonathan never saw his brother again. Mia refused to accept any money from the compensation fund. She said it would feel like her parents' lives had a price tag, and she couldn't live with that. Instead, she asked Jonathan to donate her family's share, $1.2 million, to a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents to medical negligence. Jonathan did more than that. He matched her donation with $5 million of his own money and created the Williams Family Foundation, dedicated to investigating pharmaceutical fraud and supporting its victims. He asked Mia to serve on the board. She accepted, becoming the youngest board member of any major nonprofit in the country. Jonathan's resignation as CEO was permanent, but his work was just beginning. He sold his mansion, his yacht, his art collection, his vacation homes. He kept enough to live comfortably. He wasn't a saint, and he had no interest in pretending to be one. But the rest, nearly $300 million, went into the foundation. He spent his days reviewing cases, meeting with families, testifying before Congress about the need for pharmaceutical reform. He had been a wealthy man who wrote checks to feel good about himself. Now he was something different, something he didn't have a word for, something that felt, for the first time in decades, like purpose. Mia moved in with a foster family that Jonathan had personally vetted, a black couple in their 50s, both retired teachers who had fostered over 40 children in their lives and never once made any of them feel like charity cases. She went back to school, caught up on the months she had missed, and finished 7th grade with straight A's. She joined the debate team, the science club, and a mentorship program for girls interested in law. She was still quiet, still watchful, still carried the weight of everything she had lost. But sometimes, when Jonathan visited, he saw her laugh. He saw her play with the family's dog. He saw her be a child, just for a moment, before the weight settled back onto her shoulders. On the first anniversary of the press conference, Jonathan and Mia met at Southside Community Hospital, which had been renamed the Williams Memorial Medical Center after a massive renovation funded by the compensation fund. They stood in the new lobby, surrounded by families and hospital staff and journalists, looking at a wall that bore 47 names etched in bronze: James Williams, Keisha Robinson, Marcus Thompson, and 44 others, each one a life cut short, each one a story that had ended too soon. "Do you think they would be proud of what we've done?" Jonathan asked quietly. Mia was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing her father's name on the wall. "I don't know if proud is the right word," she said finally. "I think they would be grateful. Grateful that someone finally told the truth. Grateful that their names aren't forgotten." She paused. "But I don't think pride is something the dead can feel. That's for the living. That's our burden to carry." Jonathan nodded slowly. He had learned more from this 12-year-old girl than from 3 decades of business school, board meetings, and executive coaching. He had learned that money was not power. Truth was power. He had learned that charity was not virtue. Accountability was virtue. He had learned that the measure of a person wasn't their success, their wealth, their reputation. It was what they did when they discovered they had been part of something terrible, whether they buried it or whether they burned it down and rebuilt something better from the ashes. 5 years later, Mia Williams graduated from high school as valedictorian. Her speech was not about her own achievements, but about the 47 people whose deaths had shaped her life, and about the responsibility every person had to speak truth to power, even when, especially when, that power seemed insurmountable. She was 17 years old, and she had already helped send a billionaire to prison, reformed an industry, and saved countless lives through the policies her advocacy had inspired. She was just getting started. Jonathan Reed sat in the audience, older now, grayer, but more at peace than he had ever been in his years of success. Beside him sat Mia's foster parents, her teachers, the families of other victims who had become part of her extended community. When Mia finished her speech, she looked out at the crowd and found Jonathan's eyes. She didn't smile. Mia rarely smiled, but she nodded. A small acknowledgement, a recognition of the strange journey that had brought them from a frozen sidewalk to this moment. After the ceremony, she found him by the punch bowl. "I got into Columbia," she said. "Full scholarship, pre-law." Jonathan felt tears prick his eyes. "Your father would be proud." "Maybe, but that's not why I'm doing it." She touched the red bracelet on her wrist, the same bracelet she had worn since the night they met, now faded and fraying but still intact. "I'm doing it because there are more people like Marcus out there. More companies cutting corners, more executives deciding that profit is worth more than lives, more families being destroyed while lawyers file motions and PR teams manage narratives." Her eyes were fierce, ancient, determined. Someone has to stop them. Someone has to speak for the people who can't speak for themselves. Jonathan reached out and touched the bracelet gently. "Your father gave you evidence, but he gave you something more important too. He gave you his courage, his refusal to be silent, his belief that one person can make a difference." He paused. "I was a billionaire who thought I was changing the world by writing checks. You were a homeless child with nothing but a USB drive and a conscience. And you changed more in one night than I changed in 30 years. Mia looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since Jonathan had known her, she reached out and hugged him. It was brief, almost businesslike, but it was real. "You came back," she said quietly. "That night on the street, I gave you every reason to walk away. I accused you of murder. I refused your money. I told you your entire life was built on blood. And you came back." She pulled away and looked at him steadily. "That's why I trusted you. Not because you were powerful or rich or important. Because you came back." 10 years after that frozen night in Chicago, Mia Williams stood before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, testifying in support of the Medical Accountability Act, legislation that would criminalize pharmaceutical fraud at the executive level and establish a victims' compensation fund funded by industry fines. She was 22 years old, a third-year law student at Columbia, and already one of the most influential voices in healthcare reform. Behind her in the gallery sat Jonathan Reed, now 72, white-haired and walking with a cane, but still sharp, still engaged, still fighting. When Mia finished her testimony, a senator asked her why she had dedicated her life to this cause. Mia touched the red bracelet on her wrist, worn thin now, barely holding together but still there. Still a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she was fighting for. 10 years ago, I was a homeless child on a frozen sidewalk, and a wealthy man tried to give me money to make himself feel better. I refused. I told him his money had blood on it. I expected him to walk away, to forget me, to go back to his comfortable life and never think about me again. She paused, looking at Jonathan in the gallery. Instead, he came back. He listened. He learned. And he burned down everything he had built to expose the truth. She turned back to the senators. "I'm here today because one person decided that 47 lives mattered more than $14 billion. One person decided that the truth was worth more than comfort. One person decided to be better than the system that had protected him." Her voice rose, carrying through the chamber. "If one person can do that, then we all can. If one person can choose truth over profit, accountability over convenience, justice over silence, then there's hope. There's always hope. And that's why I refuse to stop fighting. Not for money, not for power, not for recognition, but for the 47 people who can't fight for themselves, and for every person who will be saved because we refuse to look away. The Medical Accountability Act passed 6 months later. It was called the most significant pharmaceutical reform legislation in 50 years. But for Mia, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was the wall at Williams Memorial Medical Center, where 47 names were etched in bronze. What mattered was the red bracelet on her wrist, fraying now but still intact. What mattered was the father who had gathered evidence and hidden it in a child's bracelet, believing that someday, somehow, someone would listen. Someone had listened. The world had changed. And on cold nights, when the wind howled and the snow fell and Chicago looked exactly like it had on that frozen sidewalk 10 years ago, Mia would touch her bracelet and whisper the names, all 47 of them, one by one, so they would never be forgotten, so their deaths would never be meaningless. So the truth would echo forward through time, long after she was gone, reminding the world that every life matters, every voice matters, and sometimes the smallest person in the room, a homeless girl, a grieving child, a witness with nothing left to lose, can bring empires to their knees.